Hi everyone, it's our favorite day of the week. It's So Friday. So today we're going to be making these splatter aprons. They're a kid-size apron made out of our splatter fabric. It's a free download from the Robert Kaufman Fabrics website. You can find the link in our profile, and if you're interested in buying this beautiful splatter fabric, it's available through our participating partners, also listed in our profile. My name's Julia Williams. I'm subbing in today for Elizabeth Hardy. She is otherwise indisposed. She's traveling. She's fine. So you get me, and we're going to have a good time. So let's jump right into it. So I already cut out my pieces. The cutting is well laid out in our patterns. Just kind of remember that for your lining fabric, which we're using Kona cotton for, and your main fabric, the lining fabric is going to be just a little bit longer on both the main piece and the pocket. So they're not going to be quite the same size. So keep that in mind. Don't cut two of the same size pieces. So our very first step is to cut the armholes. I'm going to show you a couple ways of doing that. So I already printed out and cut out my template for the armhole. You want to make sure that the template is printed out to the correct size. As usual, we have our 1-inch marker. Go ahead and show you what that looks like. That's this box here. Go ahead and check that box against your ruler or your cutting mat. Just make sure it's actually an inch square, that your computer hasn't done anything funny with the scaling of that piece. Otherwise, you'll just have kind of an odd-shaped arm piece. The good thing about this project is that it doesn't need to be super precise anywhere. It's not like a complex quilting block. If you fudge things a little bit or things don't line up, it's not going to be the end of the world. That being said, this makes for a really good project to do with your kids or to have your kids help you with, since it is a kid-sized apron. So yeah, it's a good one since everything's a little fudgeable. So I'm going to go through 3 different ways to mark and cut your pattern pieces for the armholes. That's so you can actually get it on and have it be a comfortable fit. So the first way is, since I'm a pretty brave rotary cuttist, if that's a word, if that's a phrase I can use, I'm going to go ahead, line up my pattern piece. Another thing you want to remember, on your main fabric pattern piece, it's going to be a rectangle, and you want to make sure you're cutting one of the wrong side, the shorter sides. The good thing about this fabric also is that it's non-directional, so up, down, doesn't matter. Just make sure you're cutting a shorter side so you have a long apron and not a super wide apron. So the fastest and easiest way, and probably the way you don't want to do it with your kids, but if you're sewing by yourself is easy, is just to kind of free cut it with your rotary cutter. I like this rotary cutter with an automatic locker because safety first. Also, I have a cat. This one's cat proof for all you cat lovers out there. So this first side, I'm just going to go ahead and cut freehand. I'm not going to go too fast, but I'm just going to cut off that piece. There you go, one armhole done. Alternately, on your other side, you can go ahead and take your template, flip it over, and you can mark it first with a fabric marker, and then use your rotary cutter or scissors to cut. This is a pretty good way if you're doing it with kids, especially if you're teaching them about scissor handling. I know when I used to teach students that were on the younger side, getting to know control of your scissors was really important. Go ahead and use these guys, a little small, but they'll work just fine. And you can go ahead and cut on that line that you just marked. And depending on the type of fabric you're using, choose your marker accordingly. This is a light colored fabric, so I went ahead and just used an iron erase pen. If you're using a darker fabric, you probably want to use a chalk marker because it'll stand up a little better on the dark fabric. Go ahead, get rid of our scraps. And on your outside piece, you have your armholes. However, we also have our lining. And on the lining, I'm going to show you how to do it the super quick way if you're running short on time, say you're making these for a last-minute holiday present or as a hostess gift and you're on your way out the door for the party, you can cut both sides at once. Where did my template go? There it is. So I went ahead and I just lined up both edges hot dog style. So you have one long piece folded. I'm going to take my template, make sure the corner lines up, and I'm just going to give it a cut with my rotary cutter. Boop, boop, boop. And there you go. Get rid of these guys. And in one step, you have your armholes cut out. All right, so once that's done, we're going to set them aside for a minute, and we're going to work on the straps. So there are a couple different ways to do the straps. The pattern suggests that you do it kind of like a bias tape. This way is really good if you want to have clean, finished ends to your straps, but it's kind of fussy, in my opinion. I'm not a big fan of ironing. It's just an extra step. In my personal sewing setup, you have to get up, you have to go to the iron, you have to make sure the cat doesn't jump on your ironing board. It's a whole ordeal. I'm going to go ahead and show you a close-up, though, of what the step looks like as it's laid out in the pattern. So in the pattern, it has you fold your strips in half and then open it up and fold the raw edges of the strips to the center like this, and then fold it again on that crease that you made already. And you have this nice piece of fabric. It's super clean looking. You can also use a bias tape maker for this part if you'd like. Those are available at most local quilt shops. There are lots of different styles out there. It gives you this clean look. And then you want to tuck one edge in as you fold it up. When you sew it, all of this raw material should be stuck, and then you'll have a nice clean edge. Well, cleanish, if your fingers don't get in the way. There you go. You'll have this nice clean edge to use for your tie. I'm going to go back. However, as I said, I'm not a big fan of all that ironing. I tend to burn my fingers. It's kind of a pain for me personally. It's a personal choice. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a long tube and flip it. So again, you want to fold your strip of fabric for your ties in half, again, hot dog wise, but it's like a super long hot dog, like a Slim Jim, like an extra long Slim Jim, or a licorice rope if you prefer that, if we're running with the food analogies. The other thing I'd like to mention at this point, all of our seams are going to be a 1/2 inch seam allowance. For this step, since you're not really doing seams regularly, it doesn't matter as much if you're using the folding method. But if you're going to do the tube method, 1/2 inch seam allowance works just fine here as well. So I'm not going to do anything with my ends at this point, because again, I'm kind of lazy when it comes to straps. And this is kind of the quick and messy, but totally works way. So I'm going to go ahead, sew my tube. Again, using that 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can really pedal to the metal. If you're watching Netflix, you can kind of pay more attention to your Netflix show. I got really into Ultimate Beastmaster while sewing. It's really fun. They're doing incredible feats of human strength, and I'm sewing fabric together, and it makes me feel pretty good about myself. So there's that. I also learned that you can sing I've been working on the Railroad song about 2 times while sewing this long strip. Elizabeth and I tested it out the other day. All that being said, is it really doesn't take very long to sew all the way to the end. And I'm not worrying about back stitching or anything at this point, because I'm still going to top stitch the whole tube, or the whole strap once it's done. So right now I have one really long tube that's like an extra long licorice rope or a Slim Jim, as previously mentioned. So now the trick is to get your tube right side out. No, it's Kona, it's kind of like there is no right side, but we want to make sure that the seam allowance is tucked on the inside so we have a nice clean look. There's a bunch of different loop turners that are available in the market that you can buy. I have a couple. They all work. They all work great. However, they can sometimes be hard to find if your workplace is a little messy like someone's. So I like to use the tried and true safety pin and a string method. Preferably you use a ribbon, like a sturdy ribbon, like a twill tape. But also twill tape and ribbon can be hard to find in your very messy sewing area. So you can also just use a strip of fabric. We're going to go to a close-up and I'll show you exactly how I attach this strip of fabric to the safety pin. So you want to use a bigger safety pin, like a quilting safety pin is good, or if your safety pin locks, that's even better. And then you just tie your piece of string or your fabric to the hole of the safety pin, or if the hole is too small, you can just pin it to the pointy part of the safety pin a couple times. At this point, you really just want your long string or piece of fabric to be securely attached to your safety pin. A smaller safety pin or kind of a rickety safety pin might cause you some problems. So you want to use a big, beefy, sturdy safety pin. So now the fun part. You're going to thread the safety pin through the hole of your tube, and you kind of like push a whole bunch of fabric onto the safety pin, grab the head of the safety pin, and then pull the fabric down. And the point is you want to get this safety pin all the way to the other end, but you also want to leave a little tail of your fabric. That's going to help you grab it in the next part of this. So you just keep pushing. This is another good part where you can kind of pay a little more attention to your TV show. If, say, you know, South Korea is doing really well in Ultimate Beastmaster and you think that they're going to really make it into round 3, and then they don't, this is a good part to like get emotionally invested. If you're watching historical romance, now is a good time to pay attention to the details and the costumes, because you're just threading this onto your safety pin, pulling your fabric down, threading, pulling. You don't want too many bunches like on this long part, but you also don't want to pull it off of your tail. So just keep that in mind. And then, as soon as you know it, your safety pin will be coming out the other edge of your tube. So you have your Kona tube on your ribbon or your fabric, kind of like this. You want to take that safety pin, unpin it now, and then pin it to the edge of the seam allowance of your tube. I'll show you that in a close-up. So here you have your safety pin pinned to your seam allowance. Go ahead and close up that safety pin and then work the edge of the safety pin with the fabric back into that tube opening. So it's going to look a little awkward, but it'll all work out in the end, I promise. So, time to pay attention to your TV show again. You're going to take the edge or the end tail of your fabric or your ribbon or your twill tape or whatever you're using for this, and you're going to kind of pull it back through. Again, you want to bunch it down, but you want to make sure it's not too bunched up. The whole goal right now is to get the fabric to go back over that safety pin and to get the safety pin to come back through the tube, because this is actually what's grabbing it to pull it inside out. You're using the safety pin like a teeny tiny little hand on a really long arm. The arm is your fabric and the safety pin is your hand. It might take a little finessing at first. Just because your safety pin's big, you might have a little bulk in your fabric. You want to kind of make sure it eases in so you don't have any pulling or ripping. It can be frustrating like this sometimes. It doesn't always work out the first time. You can try moving the pin a little bit closer to the edge of your seam allowance. There we go. I think that's going to work better. And then pushing it back in. Yeah, much better. All right. So you're going to kind of do the reverse of what you just did. This is going to work, I promise.
I believe you.
Yael believes me. There's a lot of emotional support and encouragement here in the Robert Kaufman studio.
Elizabeth is watching, by the way.
Oh, hi, Elizabeth. She's watching. She just went on a whirlwind, lovely trip, and we're so excited. This is, I don't know why I'm fighting with this so much.
Are you just experiencing what Elizabeth experiences live on air?
I'm being told that I'm experiencing what Elizabeth experiences live on air. You know, folks, TV magic. It's just that, it's magic. Everything can work out perfectly when you practice it in studio ahead of time. And then be a little trickier live. All right, it's going, I promise. I brought this safety pin from home because we had a rickety safety pin in the studio earlier. And I think the safety pin is getting nervous because there's not a cat around. And it's a decidedly cat hair free environment. All right, there we go. I think we got it. Maybe? Work with me? This is the hardest step in the whole thing, guys. I promise. The good news is that if we were ironing, we would still probably be ironing at this point. I'm not a fast ironer, and I frequently burn my hands. So what is the holdup? All right, we're going to repin this one last time.
I believe in you.
Yael believes in me. That's all the encouragement I need. I think this is the lucky one. Oh, I said it out loud. I jinxed it. All right. There are lots of different kinds of loop turners. There are wire loop turners that are kind of designed for like spaghetti straps. There we go. Boom. Okay, so you pull your tail, and you pull that tail kind of gently, but with a little bit of force because the cotton fabric has a little bit of friction. Whoops, that'll happen. But again, right now, like you're watching Ultimate Beastmaster, you are not worrying about flipping this thing around. You're like very keyed in to how well your country is doing in all of those amazing acrobatic and strength tests. Or you're watching, you know, Mr. Darcy be really lovely and elegant, and you're wondering, how can I find a man like that in my life? And I don't have any tips for you there. All I can do is tell you how to sew an apron. All right, so if you get a little too bunched up, it's going to give you some resistance, or if your seam allowance is a little bit bigger, it's okay, just kind of take it slow. Work it through, make sure you don't have too much bulk here at the end. So I'll do it this way so you can see a little better. But you're just pulling it through, and it's very satisfying. It's kind of like a snake or a worm. I don't know how that's satisfying, but it somehow is. Okay, whew, we did it, guys. Thanks for bearing in there with me. Okay, we're gonna set this guy aside. Let your cat play with it. Forget about it, bury it under some papers. It doesn't matter. So now we have this tube. You can go ahead and give it a quick press. I'm gonna press it just a little bit, but we're gonna top stitch it at this point, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. So like I said, there are a couple different kinds of loop turners. There are wire ones meant for like spaghetti straps, that kind of thing. There are ones that are like basically big tubes, kind of with strings and wires in them. They're good for kind of beefier straps. Those would work for this, but generally, it works just well the first time to use the safety pin and string method. All right, this is pressed well enough for our purposes. We're gonna go ahead and top stitch. And if you've never top stitched before, the key is to not really use a seam allowance, but mainly to kind of watch your needle very closely and to make sure it's stitching right on the edge, not too far over, not too far in. You don't want it to fall off. It can go pretty quick if you're kind of focusing on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and go for it. The thing I like about these clear sewing machine feet is that you can really get like a good eye on where your fabric is and on where the needle is. We're gonna pedal to the metal fast and loose. Top stitching is pretty hard for kids, so you should probably do this part if you're sewing with children. Another fun thing to do is if you have decorative stitches on your sewing machine, to go ahead and do like a decorative stitch all down the middle instead of trying to really get like a nice top stitch on the edges. If you're so inclined, you can pick your favorite nursery rhyme or camp song, see how long it takes you to sing that, how many times you can sing your favorite camp song while you're doing this top stitching. If it's like a song in rounds, how many rounds you can do. You know, fun games you can play while top stitching. And again, this is a fun project. The top stitching keeps everything together and it's a little bit decorative. Like if you wanted to use a fun metallic thread or a contrast color, that would be really great here, but I'm not worrying too much about the perfect stitches because this is a functional piece of your apron, and the whole point of doing a splatter apron is that it's gonna kind of get pasta sauce or paint or like Play-Doh all over it. All right, so that was one strap top stitched. That was the one that I did the tube method. It looks pretty good and pretty sturdy. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the folded one now. Same idea as before. You just kind of, oops, there we go. Oh, I'm actually, yeah, no, I'm gonna keep going. Okay. So when I get to the other end of this, I'm gonna fold the end in to show you how I get a nice clean edge on this. And it's gonna look really smart. If you're giving these to like a more discerning child, like maybe one who collects encyclopedias, they might like the sharpness of this method a little better. I was not one of those children. I would be totally fine with a more slapdash approach to these straps. Like I said, these do make good gifts. They're good paired with like spatulas and cute mixing bowls that children would appreciate. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this off a little early so I can show you how to fold that in and finish it off. We're gonna go to a close-up real quick. Okay, so ideally you would fold this over before you started stitching. So it's gonna be a little awkward. But what you wanna do is you wanna open it up a little bit and then fold these in. So you're just gonna kind of tuck your ends in. You can throw a pin on there if you want to. You don't really need to. You're gonna tuck it in so that when you sew, and we sew back around, it's gonna look nice and clean. All right, let's go back to the sewing machine. All right, I'm gonna pick up stitching where I left off. There we go. I am gonna do a back stitch here, just so nothing kind of falls out in the end. Go to the edge, pivot, do a couple stitches to secure the end, pivot again, and we're back to singing I'll Be Working on the Railroad. So my niece last Christmas got an easel as a present that she loves, and this would be like a good gift with an easel. I never had an easel at home, but like I loved using them at school, and we had these kind of like funky aprons in like my kindergarten classroom. So maybe it'd be like a fun gift for like a class, like if your kids are that age, or if you're someone you know is that age. I don't know. You can also make this a more personal gift based on the fabrics you use and the colors you use. You can really make it individualized to whoever is going to be wearing it. All right. So that's it. The straps are top stitched. We're going to cut these in half later. For right now, I'm just going to leave them as they are, and I'm going to set them aside, and we're going to move on to the pocket. All right, so I cut out my pocket pieces already. The pattern calls for a lightweight interfacing. It's like a very thin interfacing. If you're going to use that, go ahead and cut out the size piece it says, fuse it to your pattern piece, and then continue back where we are. I don't love interfacing. I just think it's an extra step for something that doesn't always need to be there in a project like this. If you're making like a bag or something that really needs a lot of structure, like a bucket, you need to use interfacing, go for it, I love it. In this circumstance, we're using a really lightweight piece, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip it. If, however, you know that the kid who's going to receive this apron likes to put like rocks or small pets or heavy things or oddly shaped things in its pockets, then I would say go with the interfacing. It just gives it a little more structure. In this case, I don't think we need it. It's just kind of a convenient pocket to put small, lightweight things in. So to start off with our pocket, we're gonna put the right sides of the fabric together. So really you're just gonna put the right side of your splatter fabric down on your Kona. And then we're gonna sew all the way around using that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, if you deviate a little bit, it's totally fine. So I'm not gonna start right at the edge of the Kona lining. This top stitching will help you kind of like fold that lining in a little bit, or this isn't top stitching, this stitching, just regular stitching, is gonna help you fold that top edge in if you stitch all the way to the edge, but it's not super necessary. It kind of just gives you a runway. And remember to pivot at all the corners. My lining isn't quite matching up because I'm going pretty quick here. But again, that's all right because we're gonna flip this right side out and no one will notice. This is a pretty easy step for kids. It teaches them how to pivot. Boop, and we're gonna cut the threads. All right, so now we have this square. It's like an inside out pocket in itself. I'm gonna go ahead and clip these bottom 2 corners. This is gonna help the corners have like a nice sharp edge, not a narp edge. Nice sharp edge when we flip it right side out. So I'm just gonna go ahead and maybe we could do a close-up here. I'm gonna go ahead and just cut it on a diagonal, very close, but not through the stitches I just made. So where it pivots, I'm just gonna like really skim that and get very close. The closer you can get to your stitches, the sharper your edge can potentially be. If you were to cut like really far away, you're not really doing much for yourself. So you wanna go ahead and cut pretty close to your stitches. But again, make sure you don't cut through them because then you just like undid all your hard work and you'll be super duper sad. But you can redo it, so it's not a big deal. All right, so then we're gonna flip our pocket right side out. I like to use a chopstick, or if I have a fairly fine pen, like one of these should work, just so long as it's not open, just to kind of help me to push those corners out. I like nice sharp corners. You can also buy point turners. They're fun little tools, but I have a lot of chopsticks hanging out at home because I order out a lot, and they always give me extra chopsticks because I order enough for 2 people. Fun fact about my life. So once you have your pocket turned right side out, it's kind of, again, a pocket in itself, but we're actually gonna close this up and we're gonna create a cute contrast detail with this extra bit of lining. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you in a close-up how we're gonna fold that. So we're gonna take this raw edge and we're gonna fold it to line up with this raw edge. And as you can see here, I don't know if it was my cutting or just the fact that I was going quickly, but it's not super perfectly lined up. Again, that's A-okay. It's all gonna be folded over and worked out in the end. All right, so ideally, if you could see the ironing board here while I fold, that would be ideal, but I'm just gonna show you kind of finger folding. So we're gonna match those raw edges together. This edge that's a little bit bigger, I'm gonna fold over slightly more. It's gonna be trapped in the end by our stitching, so it's all right. We're gonna make sure it's as, fairly even, and that all of like kind of our extra pieces and raw edges are tucked in so that we don't see them. Ideally you would press here, but the iron's all the way over there, so I'm not gonna do it. And then you're gonna fold it over again and press again. And just make sure that for visual's sake, that this contrast piece is fairly even and straight. So let's go over to the ironing board and iron that down. So This is kind of fun. Like, it's an easy way to get kind of, oh, I went a little Australian there, to get kind of a bias tape look without having to mess around with bias tape. I love bias tape, it can be kind of fiddly, and this is an easier way of getting that same look. So now that it's pressed, I'm gonna throw a couple pins in it. I've been told that Elizabeth does not like to pin. Well, it's a different ballgame. I like to throw a couple pins in my projects. I like the security it gives me. I'm just gonna throw 2 pins in here though, just to keep the corners nice and neat while I'm moving it around and lining up my sewing machine needle. Come on. All right. When you're pinning, you always wanna have the heads of your pins on the right side of your project so you can easily pull them out while sewing. That's kind of like a fun trick that I think a lot of, not a trick, but something to consider that I think a lot of experienced sewists do naturally but don't think about. That's a good thing to keep in mind if you're teaching kids or learning to sew or like are having problems with your pins. So again, we're gonna top stitch, so your seam allowance is less important than just kind of getting the needle in the right spot. So I'm gonna take out that first pin, it did its job, the needle's in place, lower your presser foot, stitch. I'm just gonna do a small little back stitch just to keep it all good. I'm going to stitch all the way around. There are different ways you can top stitch this. Actually, I'm just gonna do the top part, just so it all stays together. And I'm gonna top stitch the very top and not just the part that we folded over, because I like that look. But we'll top stitch around the edge later when we actually attach it to the apron. And when we attach this to the apron in a couple steps, I'm just gonna leave it as like one big pocket. But the fun part about this is that you can top stitch it to the apron and add a couple pockets if you want by adding more top stitching down the middle in that attachment phase. So like if you know the kid's gonna be wearing, like drawing a lot with pencils or crayons, you can add in some like thin pockets for crayons that they can kind of tuck into. There we go. Oh, I accidentally hit the bullseye button instead of the rewind button because buttons are in slightly different spots. All right, so there's one super nice pocket, and we're gonna hang on to that for right now. Go ahead and look at my notes. All right, so we're gonna attach this pocket to the exterior piece of the apron. So back to that piece that we cut out way early on, this guy. Just to double check that you cut out the armholes on the right side, because now is a good time to recut if you happen to make any accidents. So we're gonna position this pocket. I like to make sure things are kind of out of the way for this, because once we get the straps, it's all gonna be like straps and wiggles, and things can get out of hand pretty easily. I'm gonna press this crease out too, just because it's gonna make things easier down the line. I'm not big into washing my fabric ahead of time if I don't have to. Just like to save my quarters. So for something like this, you can just kind of grab fabric out of your stash and start sewing, which is nice. It's not super important that you wash it ahead of time. Shrinkage is gonna be fairly small. It's just an apron. So we're gonna put our pocket on the front part of the apron, and we're gonna do 6 inches from each side, and we're gonna do 9 inches up from the bottom. So this ruler is kind of long, but you can use like a square quilting ruler or any kind of ruler. We're gonna use this one because that's what we have here, but anything that's got a dimension of 9 and 6 on it, you can use to do these measurements. So make sure your ruler is going the right direction. That's always a good sewing tip. Put your ruler in the right direction. And then you can either use a heat erasable marker or a chalk marker, or I like to use a pin to kind of mark a position. I'm just marking 9 inches up with a pin. Again, it doesn't need to be super, super precise. This is just to give us an estimate. I'm going to move this down, and then I'm going to mark the 6 inches. So you really only need to do 6 inches from one side, but it helps to look at both sides just in case the piece you cut is a little big. You can kind of eyeball center your pocket. Yeah, it looks like we're 6 inches from both sides. It looks good. I lined it up with the pin I used to mark down here. I'm going to take this pin out, but hold my pocket in place, and then I'm going to re-pin that pocket right here. I'm going to throw a couple more pins in there. Since I'm pinning this on top of something, and it's just so that your pocket doesn't move around too much, I'm going to use a couple more pins, and I'm going to pin on the inside instead of worrying about having the head of the pin hanging off, just because in this instance it doesn't matter too much. You just kind of want to keep things good and sturdy and secure. Boop, boop. I like these pins. So these glass head pins are good because you can iron on top of the head of the pin, and the iron won't melt the head of the pin. I have melted many a pin in my sewing career, particularly when I was younger, and just wanted to buy like cute, sparkly pins, and didn't really know what I was doing. So now that we have this pinned in place, we're gonna top stitch the pocket down to the apron. I'm just gonna top stitch around the edge, but again, if you want to make extra pockets for crayons or colored pencils, you can do more lines, and that could be super fun. You can do a line down the middle, have 2 pockets, do something offset, make something like phone sized. It's your choice. Super customizable. So line this up. Your pins are keeping everything in place. Go ahead and backstitch again, just because if someone does put something heavy in there, you don't want your pocket just coming off. And I'm not being as close to the edge as I was when I was doing the straps, just because I want this to be really securely attached. But I'm not sewing super far in either. Just enough so it's secure and won't fall off. Again, this is another fun place to use like a decorative thread or a contrast thread or something to really make it pop. It's all good. It's all fun and games. And it's all personal. Go around, almost done. Backstitch. Make sure you're hitting the correct button. There are sometimes lots of buttons on sewing machines. So, button awareness. It's important. Or something. Okay. Now that we have the pocket all put in place, we're going to head back to the straps. All right, remember these guys from earlier? I hope you do, because it hasn't been that long. I almost forgot about them though. So we're gonna go ahead, we're just gonna fold the straps in half. You can do this one at a time. I'm doing both at the same time because it feels more efficient. But you can do each one on its own if you'd like. Go ahead, fold them in half, get them close enough. Based on how you sewed it and if you folded it or not, some of the straps might stretch a little bit. That's just how it goes. All right, so they might not all be the right length, but again, it doesn't really matter. They're just going to be tied on anyway. So this is the end where we folded the fabric in, and so we have a pretty clean edge. I'm going to trim my threads. So this is one look of an end of your strap. It's clean, it's tidy, it works really well. We can also just take the edge and fold it over twice like you would do any regular hem. We can show that in the close-up. So this is just folded over once and then once more. I'm folding it about a 1/2 inch each time. You can do 1/4 inch, you can do 3/4 inch, whatever floats your boat. and we're gonna top stitch that. So that's, you can either do like a cute decorative X, or you could just do it around once. Oops, this is kind of bulky, so I'm sort of getting my fingers in there, so maybe not the safest for kids, but it holds. There we go. It's held. It's good enough. It's not beautiful, but it works. You can make it more beautiful if you have a little more finesse. I am not dripping in finesse, but that's okay. The other option is to just kind of leave it. You're gonna have these selvage edges on every edge of your straps. So you can just kind of trim your messy thread ends and then leave it. It's not gonna unravel because it's the selvage edge and you get kind of this cute paintbrush feel. Or what I think is kind of fun is to tie it in a knot. It gives you kind of like a visual finality to it, but you don't have to do too much. And you can either use the selvage edge to tie it in a knot, or you could use your raw edge and tie it in a knot. And then it's just cute. And this is something that your kids can definitely do. You know, a lot of like good skills. And then it's just kind of this cute knot at the edge. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that with these two straps, leave the others finished as they are. And those will be my waist ties. So now you have 4 finished straps. 2 are clearly gonna be for the neck and 2 are gonna be for your waist. I don't recommend getting creative with the strap placement. It just doesn't work that way, I'm sorry. You kind of gotta do 2 for the neck and 2 for the waist. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna now place these on your front apron piece. It's so beautiful and splattery and colorful. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull this down a little bit. That's what we're gonna do. Okay, we're going to line up the edge that's going to be kind of sewn into your apron. We're going to line that up with the side edge of your apron, and we're going to be down a 1/2 inch from the bottom of the armhole. And you can be really precise, but you can also eyeball it if you want. I think for right now we're going to be a little more precise. Yeah, we're just about there. Boop. All right, I'm gonna throw a pin in it to keep it in place. I'm gonna hold it where it is. Excuse me. Move my ruler, add pin, and we're gonna go on to the next one. So same thing on the other side. Line it up with the edge, but down a 1/2 inch. The reason we're going down a 1/2 inch is because that 1/2 inch is gonna be our seam allowance, and we wanna make sure that the straps line up with the top of the bottom of our arm. We want it to just like kind of kiss the seam allowance, but not get caught up in it. And hey, we're right on the money there just by eyeballing it. So that's good. All right, throw another pin in here. And then we're gonna do the same thing with the neckties, except instead of being down, we're gonna line up the edge with the top edge. Move this a little bit again. And then we're gonna, oops, don't let these guys run away from you. We're gonna put them in a 1/2 inch. So again, they'll just kind of kiss your seam allowance, but they won't get trapped up in it. The edge is a little funky, so I'm gonna do it actually. Yeah, I'm gonna do it there. And you can also use the marks on your cutting mat to help guide your 1/2 inch. So like if I line up this top corner with a 1/2 inch mark, I can line up my strap with an inch mark, and then I can throw a pin in there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to line up the edge of my apron with an inch mark and then throw this on the 1/2 inch mark. So here's an instance where I kind of cut the top of this a little wonky. Again, that's fine. It's gonna just be kind of a hair off. I'm gonna line up the lowest, kind of the lowest part up with the edge of the fabric, just to make sure that all of the strap is going to be caught up in my seam allowance. So you can fudge it a little bit. It is not the end of the world. All right, so now that our straps are pinned, You can kind of tuck the ends of your straps into this pocket just so they don't get caught up when you're sewing your lining onto the back of your apron. So kind of make sure it's flat on the edges, but it's all tucked into your pocket. Or you can like tie the edges of your straps up and you just want to get them out of the way basically. So now we're going to take our lining piece of the apron. Again, double check that you did it on the right side. I believe I did. I'm going to give this a quick press. We're in the home stretch. This is such like a fun, quick project. And you could do this out of so many different types of fabrics. The splatters are great though, because whether they're using the aprons for painting or cooking, it's just gonna kind of hide the mess. And at the end of the day, hiding a mess is better than doing laundry, which is not true, but it definitely helps. Okay, so I'm lining up the lining piece with the corresponding edges of the main fabric. Again, you want to make sure that it's all kind of right. If it doesn't line up perfectly, you're okay. You're going to have sort of a lump here in the middle where the extra pieces of strap are. That's all right, as long as it's smoother towards the edges. And if there's a lump in the middle, that means that kind of all of those straps are going to be out of the way of your sewing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pins I use to pin the straps down. I'm going to hold the straps between all 3 layers, take out the pin, and I'm going to repin it through all the layers. This just makes sure that your straps super don't move. You just really don't want them going anywhere. Otherwise, it'll just get kind of weird, it'll hang odd. That's kind of the only thing that I would be precise about. I wouldn't get my straps too wonky. Everything else can be a little off. So I'm going to repin those. I'm also going to throw in a couple more pins around the edges. It's just that extra level of security so that nothing slips. So I'm going to put a couple here on the armholes. They're not really holes, they're like arm curves, like French curves. I don't know. We were having a discussion about armholes earlier. I guess they're a hole. It's semantics. So pinning, pinning. At this point, also notice that the bottom of your apron, like the lining piece, hangs out a little bit lower than your main fabric. Again, that's going to be for that contrast look, that kind of like faux bias tape detail. I'm going to throw a couple more pins in down here. Again, with the head of the pin on the outside of the project, so I can pull them out easily as I go around. Boop, boop. That's the fun I'm pinning action noise. It makes a boop noise. Lots of other things while I'm sewing make a boop noise. It's just how it goes. All right. So I'm going to gingerly take this back over to my sewing machine, making sure that my straps kind of aren't going anywhere. And again, you can start at the very edge of the blue fabric, but you don't have to. Some sewing machines can be a little fussy if you start sewing at the edge. So I'm going to start in a little bit. And then I'm just going to sew 1/2 inch all the way around. And I'm not going to backstitch at the bottom again because we're going to keep that fabric's going to be sewn up in the end anyway. Where did my pin cushion go? There it is. We're going to move that over here. All right. So it's going to go all the way around, pedaled in the middle. Keep an eye on your seam allowance so it doesn't get too wonky. But like I said over and over again, this is a pretty carefree, unfussy project. This is a perfectly fine step for you to do with kids. Teaches them a lot about like sewing straight lines, curves a little bit, pivoting. And then when you get to the pin that is pinning your strap in place, make sure that you're holding the strap in place with your fingers as you pull the pin out and you approach it. You really don't want to sew over your pins. I used to sew over my pins when I was a carefree young lass. And one time my sewing machine needle hit a pin, the needle snapped and it flew at my face. And it was really scary. It luckily did not hit my face or my eyes, but I did get in the habit for a couple months after that of wearing those like really horrible fashion glasses that were like hot pink and like fake clear plastic lenses. It was not a good look, even though they were called fashion glasses. So it's better practice to just not sew over your pins. I have a couple of acquaintances with glasses, like prescription glasses, that are just very careless, but I don't recommend it. It's just risky business. If you like really can't stand the idea of pins or slowing down to sew over your pins, you can always use like quilting clips, but that's kind of bulky when a pin will do the job. Some people like to use like fusible tape or like fabric sticky tape that washes away. You're welcome to do that. Again, I think a pin is just fine. So the other thing is when you're getting to like these corners where you pivot, you want to try and stop a ½ inch away from the edge. I have gotten pretty good at eyeballing it, and also I'm not super concerned about precision. What I have seen some people do when they know they have to do projects like this, where they have to do lots of pivots and they have to be very mindful of their seam allowances, they've put a piece of like painter's tape or washi tape on their sewing machine to kind of mark that distance. So the reason you want to stop a ½ inch away from the edge is so that you can pivot and that you can have the correct seam allowance when you're sewing your new seam. So a little piece of tape can help. When I'm quilting, I do that because it matters a lot more. Project like this, it doesn't matter. You can eyeball it and feel pretty comfortable. Get that practice, that good eyeball practice in for gauging that distance. All right, I'm coming up on the end. Cut my thread. Woohoo. All right, so we cut all the way around. At this point, if you really wanted to, you could trim your seam allowance at these corners, but it's a little awkward to do that trimming because you kind of have to cut through the strap as well. And we have those straps there to help us really like pop those corners out, so I'm gonna not do that. But I know a lot of people who would probably prefer to do that, so it is always an option. We're gonna reach in this bad boy, grab some of those straps that we tucked in, and flip this guy right side out. All right, and again, just kind of give those straps a tug, and that'll really help you pull those corners out. Get like nice, clean edges. Always love that. You could give an apron like this to a kid who maybe likes to play barber, but don't give them hair cutting scissors, because that sounds like it'll end badly. You know, aprons are very useful, good for all kinds of events. So at this point, it's not a bad idea to give it a press. Excuse me, let me grab some water. Getting a little dry there. Okay, we're back at it. So you give your edges a press. But you just kind of want to smooth things out, make sure everything's good to go. Pardon me. If you want to, you can clip these curves on the inside with your seam allowance. But the curve is gentle enough that you don't really need to. If you're working with a stiffer, bulkier fabric, you probably want to though. But at this point, say you're not liking the way this is laying, you can always flip your apron right side out, give it a clip, and then flip it back this way. It's not a difficult flip, but for right now, everything looks good. I'm going to give the edges a quick press, and I'm also going to give this bottom hem area quick press. We can go to a close-up one more time just so I can really show you what that fold looks like. It's the same as the pocket, where you fold the raw edge over, make it meet the raw edge of your main fabric, make sure you're tucking in your edges, and then fold it over one more time just for that nice clean look. So I'm going to go ahead and press that. This is a nice ironing station. For something like this, you want to use a nice big ironing board. And make sure if you're doing this with kids, you probably don't want to let them use the iron, but you definitely want to watch them. You probably want to do the ironing part. I probably used the iron maybe a little bit too young, but my grandma used to pay me $0.25 for every napkin I starched and ironed for her, and I probably made about 10 bucks that way every time I went and saw my grandma. I think she was just being kind, and then also using me as very cheap labor. But it was fun. I got pretty good at pressing. I don't really like to press my laundry, but I love pressing while sewing. There's something about like the steam and the sound of the iron and kind of the heat that I feel like is all part of the sewing process and part of like the magic and the romance of it. So there's that. I'm going to throw a couple more pins in this long edge just because it is a little longer. Boop. So to finish this bad boy off, we're just going to sew one seam all the way down the bottom, and then give the rest of this a good press. If you want to, though, you can top stitch all the way around the edge. Again, you can use a decorative stitch or a decorative thread, anything to make it fun and personal. It's all up to you. Go over here. All right, pull out that first pin once the presser foot's down. Locate your pin cushion, your migrating pin cushion. I can never keep them in one spot while I'm sewing. We're going to go ahead and back stitch. We don't want this seam coming undone. Sometimes I feel a little sad when I come up on like the last seam or the last couple of seams of a project. Sometimes I just want that last seam to come and finish it real quick. But sometimes I really enjoy a project and I get kind of sad, a little nostalgic, and I think about all the seams I've done. It's a nice feeling, especially when like holiday sewing. I don't know, maybe that's weird, maybe that's just me. Maybe that's me anthropomorphizing my sewing projects too much. Who knows? Could be a personal quirk. Leave a comment if you're the same way. All right, last back stitch. I'm gonna give this bad boy one more press. I'm gonna make sure that I trim all of my loose threads, especially if these are gifts. I like that feeling when people are like, wow, you sewed this, you made this? I could have bought this at a company. I could have bought this at some fancy cookware company. I can't believe you made this for me. And you're like, well, I made it for you. It's very nice. Those accolades are kind of like everything when you're giving a handmade gift. But again, maybe that's a personal thing. All right, press the top. And there you have it. There is a kid's splatter apron. It's we can call it adult size too. I'll go ahead and put it on. Tie it around your neck. Tie it around your waist. And we're good to go. Oh, I see one more loose thread. I'm going to go ahead and give that a snip. But thanks for joining us, everyone. That was the Kids Splatter Apron. Again, it's a free download from the Robert Kaufman Fabrics website. Link is in the profile, and the fabric is available from our participating partners. Have a great Friday.